Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Heritage at Brentwood Brad Breeding's webinar. I'm glad that you can join us today. We were a few minutes late because we were trying to get a video queued up for you to see the community. Unfortunately, we weren't able technology-wise to do that, but you will be receiving a follow-up email and with a link to the video showcasing the community. So when you do get that email, just click on that link and you'll see a brand new video showcasing the Heritage's beautiful landscaping and the amenities. Well, I'm welcoming today Brad Breeding. Brad and I have known each other, I don't even know, maybe 10 years or so. It's been a long time. And virtually, we've known each other. He's been a tremendous partner with the Heritage in offering us some insight with financials, and also helping many of the residents who have moved into the community, sorting through their questions with financial concerns. Brad is a certified financial planner and the president of My Life Site, a trusted resource for information on retirement communities. Brad has been recognized in the Clippinger's magazine, the Wall Street Journal, Market Watch, Wall Street Journal's Market Watch, USA Today, the New York Times. And he has a wonderful website that you all should go on after this event, which is mylifesite.net. No further ado, I'm going to welcome Brad, and he's going to start the webinar. Thank you, Brad, for doing this for us.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you, Judy. I really appreciate the invitation to present, and welcome to all of you that are on the call this morning. Really glad to spend a little bit of time with you. I'm sorry that we couldn't get Judy's video to play. I know you all would have enjoyed that, but as she said, we'll hopefully be able to get that out to you afterwards, along with a recording of the call today. So planning your future in an uncertain environment is what we want to talk about today. And so let me go, before we get to the content, just a few things, a little bit more about me. As Judy mentioned, I am currently the president of a company called mylifesite.net. And this is an online resource for tools and information and analysis to help people navigate what I often refer to as complex senior living decisions. Prior to that, I spent a number of years, 13 or 14 years, as a personal financial advisor and certified financial planner. I no longer actively practice in that business. My focus now is on My Life Site, but I mentioned that because I want you to know that anything I share with you today in terms of planning, finances, and so forth, it's totally objective, just sort of my views on things in the hopes that it can help you in your planning. I'm not trying to gather any clients or anything like that on this call today. A quick disclaimer, anything that I do mention, of course, shouldn't be construed as personal financial advice. You need to talk with your own financial professional and tax advisor and so forth before making any decisions about your situation. Now, if you've not used this GoToWebinar format before, just a couple of things very quickly. Number one, you should all have this sort of control panel looking thing like this. And it has this button, this orange button with this white arrow that you can click to either move that control panel over or click it again to bring it out on the screen where it will look similar to what you see here. And the reason you may want to bring it out onto the screen is because if you have questions as I'm presenting today, you can click on the question section and pull that up and you can type a question in. And so Judy and her staff will be able to see those questions as I'm presenting. And then at the end, we'll save some time to try to address those questions. So please be sure to use that if you want to. That's what it's there for. And then again, you can just click that button and it'll move that control panel back over off of your screen so you can see the slides. Another thing is that you're all on mute right now, and that's by design. That's because anytime we have a call with a lot of people like this, you know, there can be background noise, and we want to limit distractions. So you should be able to hear us. We can't hear or see you, but if you have questions, again, feel free to submit those as I showed you a moment ago. So what am I going to be covering with you today? Well, really, I want to kind of touch on the things that we hear a lot from people right now in terms of those kind of those hot button things that are on everybody's mind. So, certainly the recent volatility in the stock market. Now, I realize things have improved a little bit over the last few months compared to earlier this year, but I think we still need to keep perspective on what's happening in the markets anytime, whether the markets are down or whether they're up. So I'll touch on that for a few moments. Talk a little bit about the housing market. Some of you, maybe you're trying to decide whether this is a good time to sell your home and move to Heritage at Brentwood or somewhere else, whatever it may be. But I'll touch on that. Obviously, these are very uncertain times. I think if there's one thing we could agree upon, that's it. So how do we plan through that uncertainty? I want to talk about widening the scope a little bit of what retirement planning means in my mind. We'll talk about some of the different senior living options. You may be doing your research and comparing your different choices. And so I'll touch on that. And then finally, of course, kind of a big topic right now, clearly, is the, COVID-19 and the impact this is having on senior living. So I'll touch on that. So I want to begin by sharing one of my favorite quotes, which comes from Mike Tyson, who once said, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched." I love this quote. I think it applies to many things in life in the sense that we can have the best laid plans and then something unforeseen can happen and it can change everything. We saw this earlier this year with coronavirus and, what happened to the markets and really our whole society, touched every aspect of our lives. So, we start to question our plans maybe with things like that or reevaluate our plans. Do we even have the right plans in place? And so, I'll talk through some of the ways to stay focused through a period of time like this. So I want to begin by sharing the 3 keys to financial confidence, because people talk a lot about this. What's important to maintaining financial confidence or maybe financial security? And in my opinion, there are 3 elements that are really important to that. And if any of these 3 are missing, it's tough to maintain that financial confidence, particularly during an environment like this. Perspective, objective, or maybe plural, objectives possibly, and then finally a plan. If you don't have proper perspective on things, then that can, that's when our emotions tend to drive our decision making, and that's not always good. Without very clear objectives, it's difficult to really even have a reliable plan. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about each of these. So begin with perspective. As I said, I want to share a little bit with you about what's going on or has been going on in the stock market. I know, again, that things earlier this year, people were kind of panicking maybe or, really concerned over what's happening in the market. And it shows, I think, our emotional behavior as human beings in the sense that now I'm not hearing people seem to be okay now that things have recovered. But as I mentioned, I think we have to maintain perspective and a longer, kind of a wider view of things. So this first chart really shows what's happened in the stock market here in the United States over the past year. You can really see this V shape, kind of this almost like it's felt like a roller coaster. And this is the Wilshire 5000. So it's another index, kind of like the S&P 500, but instead of looking just 500 companies, it looks like 5,000. So it's a more, it's a broader representation of the market here in the U.S. Obviously, this does not involve bonds or overseas markets, just an idea, kind of a general idea of what's happened here with stocks in the U.S. So as we look at this, of course, we know that here before coronavirus, the market was just kind of chugging along, felt like it would just continue to go up indefinitely. And then, of course, we had this 32% drop, really suddenly, very dramatically as a result of coronavirus. And then almost, simultaneous with the stimulus plan or the announcement of the stimulus, the market began to recover, and we've since gone up about 38% since then. You can see that just a few weeks ago we were considerably higher. But I think again the stimulus helped with that. There's other aspects of the stimulus that people could debate in terms of the long-term effects and budget deficits and debt and all of these things. But nonetheless, it certainly has helped in terms of the stock market. I think there's been a general overall positive outlook in the sense that there's a feeling that we'll be in a better place 6 months from now, 7 months from now than we are now in terms of coronavirus. And I think we're starting to see that favorable view on the vaccines and treatments and these kind of things. So I think that general optimism, the sense that this temporary, has driven some of this, a number of other things. But nonetheless, you can see kind of what's happened here over the last year. Now, here's a couple of things I like to point out to people. If you really look at where we are relative to the previous high, so this was the all-time high in the stock market up until just a few weeks ago when we surpassed that yet again. But right now, as of yesterday, the market's down about 4% from that previous high. But this points to perspective. Instead of focusing on where we are relative to that previous high point, if you take a little wider view and you look at the last 12 months, you realize we're up about 9%. So 13%, percentage point difference there. So it really depends. So often the headlines focus on, particularly when the market's down, they always focus on where it is relative to the high. But that doesn't always do us justice. It drives those emotions. And I think it's important to take a little wider view. So this is a really good example of that. So over the last year, the market's up about 9%, even though, yes, we're still down from that previous high. Now, really talking about perspective, we have to recognize also that that previous high marked the end of a more than 10-year bull run in the stock market, longest bull run in the history of the stock market. And you can see that as represented on this chart. In fact, over those 10 years, the market's gone up cumulatively about 175%. So, that's pretty impressive. And I think we have to recognize that while none of us want to see our account values go down, we don't necessarily like volatility and so forth, we do have to remember kind of where this market's been and this incredible run that this market's had over the last 10 years. And so that can help us to have a little more perspective, to maybe take a step back when the markets are volatile and realize that, maybe it's not as bad as it feels when we look at the wider view of things. Now, this leads to one other thing I want to point out. By nearly every measure that someone could look at, I think the conclusion would be that this market is rather overpriced right now. Now, you could get into saying, well, sure, but there's some stocks within the market that maybe are a better value. But just in general, I think almost every measure would suggest this market's pretty overpriced right now. In fact, this chart in particular is one way to look at that. And this looks at the average PE ratio of all the 500 stocks on the S&P 500. Now, as many of you may know, a PE ratio simply looks at the price of a stock relative to the earnings or the fundamentals of that company. And so this is the average of the entire S&P 500. Right now, it's at about 29, almost 30. You'll realize it's only been higher than this a couple of other points ever. The historical median is about 15.8, and that's on an inflation-adjusted basis. So we're nearly double the historical median. So what is this, why am I sharing with this information with you? Well, really what I'm trying to say is sometimes, and you all already know this, sometimes the market pulling back is actually a good thing. We don't want the market to continue to just get overpriced, and continue to inflate, because that can lead to bigger problems long term. So some of the pullback I've seen over these last few weeks, I kind of welcome, even though I don't necessarily like seeing that on my account statement. But I think we have to factor that in to our planning, recognizing that maybe it's a really good time to rebalance, maybe take some chips off the table, so to speak, whatever we want to call it. And just keep in mind where this market is right now in terms of where it's priced historically. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the housing market. Some of you, maybe you're wrestling with this question right now. Maybe you're saying, well, we're going to wait, or we're going to hold off to sell our home. Well, what we've seen over the last 10 years in the housing market here in the United States parallels in many ways what I just showed you with the stock market. You can see that right here on this chart. This represents the national average of home prices over the last 65 years. And the top line, that sort of brown or orangish line, that's on an inflation-adjusted basis. So taking inflation out of it, you can still see the price increases, particularly here over these last 10 years. And so that's pretty incredible. And kind of like I said a moment ago, I think we have to remember that. Now, having said that, as you all probably know, this market, the housing market, has not slowed down in most parts of the country. Where we have seen slowdowns have been in big metropolitan areas. But aside from that, this is still a very strong market overall. And what's happened is, inventories were still were very tight even before all of this happened. You would think that this would have changed things, but as a realtor put it to me, what's really happened over these last 6 months is that the equilibrium hasn't changed that much. In other words, while there are fewer buyers in this market because of the economy and some of those things, there's also fewer sellers. I saw a statistic, this was in California, but I suspect it's representative of what we've seen across the country, where, and this was several months ago, but it said in California, the number of buyers was 50% less than it was, I think, a year ago. But it said the number of sellers is 45% less. So that illustrates what I'm saying to you, and that some people have just either delisted their homes or waited to sell, and that's just kept inventories very tight overall. Now, could that change? Certainly. But right now, it's still very much a seller's market in terms of real estate prices. Obviously, the low mortgage rates are going to continue to help. Record low mortgage rates that we're seeing right now. Now, low interest rates are not necessarily good for savers. There's a downside to that in some ways, but certainly in terms of mortgage rates, every 1% that mortgage rates go up, that decreases purchasing power by 10%. And people don't want to miss out on that purchasing power, so that's continuing to help. And I think for the foreseeable future, we'll continue to see those low rates. For how long? Nobody knows. They can be somewhat volatile in certain economic environments, but for now, those rates are still pretty low, very low, I should say. But if you think about what I said a moment ago, how all these folks that have either waited to sell their home or who have delisted their homes, if that starts to change, if those folks come back all at once, and that may not happen, but if they come back around the same time and all of a sudden people start to list their homes, that can drive inventory up pretty quickly. And that can make it more difficult to sell a home. So I don't think that's happened yet, at least not nationally, but certainly that's something to consider, particularly if, in addition to that, mortgage rates were to creep up a little bit. Those two things could actually change the market, fairly rapidly. So keeping that in mind, I think the biggest thing is just asking, what are you waiting for? If somebody says, I'm waiting, I think it's just important to know what you're waiting for. Know what those parameters are, what you're willing to work within, so that you don't just end up waiting indefinitely, or waiting until a period of time when it's actually more difficult to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Now let's talk a little bit about objectives. So, perspective, talks about that stock market, housing market. Now that next thing that I mentioned, which is objective. So what are your objectives? This is really, really important. And I don't mean, you see these commercials for some of these brokerage firms, they talk about your goals and your dreams. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that it's so important to have a very clear objective in terms of your finances that you can plan around. The reason why is because, number one, without clear objectives, then when we do have volatility in the market, like we saw earlier this year, and like we're kind of even seeing right now, really, when we have that, you really don't know what that means to your situation without objectives. So that's when we just the goal becomes, well, I don't want to lose much money, or when the market's up, I want to earn as much as I can, or what have you, but we don't really know what that volatility means if we don't have objectives. So in that sense, you really can't even have a reliable plan. So let's just talk for a moment about what I mean when I talk about objectives. Well, I kind of break it down to primary and secondary. So primary objectives would be, these are just some examples. A very basic one might just be to never run out of money to live comfortably. Now, for some of you, that may not ever be a concern. For others of you, maybe that is a concern. Whatever the case may be, these are just examples. But, if this was somebody's really their only primary objective, then in theory, it means they could even draw down some of their principal over their lifetime if they needed to, because the only real goal is to make sure they always have enough there to live comfortably. But of course, for many of you, there's probably another one, which is to leave X amount to my family or to my charity. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, I don't want to dip into my principal, and you have to ask, well, why not? So this is, that conceivably they want to kind of keep a cushion for themselves or maybe leave something behind. And so I think it actually makes sense to assign a number to that. How much do you want to leave for your family and charities or both? Because then at least you say, well, I know what we have now, I know what we want to have at the end, and I know what I need to live comfortably. And that way, anytime we have volatility, it's really easy to say, okay, is this volatility, has it substantially altered my probability of meeting that objective? And if the answer is no, then we don't have to carry that stress of what's happening in the markets. But I think sometimes people don't think that way. They just let the volatility alone kind of drive their emotions. And so, understanding what that number is, you may end up with more, may end up with a little less, but at least you can look and say, kind of connect the dots when we have volatility. But beyond this, there's probably some secondary objectives that are important to you. And these secondary objectives have to be planned for within, or I would say under, your primary objectives. Those may be things like to not be a burden on my family. This is a really important thing to a lot of people, particularly retirees, older adults. And so this may be a big part of why you're in conversations with Judy and the team at Heritage at Brentwood. Maybe you want to have your own plan in place. You want to make sure that you don't have to rely on other people, or family members if your situation were to change in the future. Maybe you have the goal to protect against the cost of long-term care. This also is very important to people, and there's a number of ways to do that, and I'll touch on some of those in a moment, but there could be others. But these secondary objectives, again, have to be planned for as a part of your broader primary objective. So now let's move on and talk about that third component, planning. Perspective, objective, and now planning. Well, when I use the phrase retirement planning, I think most people, when you think about that, number one, we need to recognize that retirement planning continues through retirement. It doesn't just lead up to retirement. Now it takes a little different shape, but retirement planning is just as important throughout retirement. But most people, I think, when I say retirement planning, think about money. They think about finances, and that certainly is an important part of it, but there's more to it than that. And I think it's important that we understand and recognize what those other aspects are. So this survey that you see before you comes from Merrill Lynch. This is several years old now, but I suspect the answers will be very similar if they were to do this again. They asked people in retirement, what are some of your biggest concerns about living a long life? After all, we need a plan for a long life, right? To make our money last. So what are some of your big concerns about living a long life? You can see the answers. The top concern was serious health problems. The next biggest concern, not being a burden on my family. That was one of those secondary objectives I mentioned a moment ago. You can even see things like being lonely and not having a purpose. So again, some of these don't even have much to do with money. And if you were to think about, what's the purpose of planning after all? The purpose really is peace of mind. And so if you ask yourself, what does peace of mind mean to me? At this stage of my life, what does peace of mind really represent? I would say for many of you, it's the opposite of what we see here. In other words, to the extent that you can protect yourself or minimize these concerns, that's going to increase your peace of mind. And that's why we need to think about all of these components in retirement planning, because they're interconnected in many ways. So if you think about what a retirement plan really involves, number one, certainly it's finances. There's no question that's a big part of it. But also things like this, preventative health. Now, where does that fit in? Well, you saw in that survey a moment ago, Two of those concerns were things like being lonely and not having a purpose. These are sort of social wellness concerns. There's other aspects of wellness: vocational, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, certainly physical. Well, these things certainly contribute to your well-being and your health today, but it also, in theory, the more you're sort of optimizing those wellness components in your life now, the less you'll spend on medical expenses later. Now, I realize that's not always true. There can be outliers in certain circumstances, but in general, a healthier lifestyle today should minimize those health concerns later. So it does kind of come back to finances. I think the other piece is post-health event planning. What do I mean by this? Well, many of you, or all of us, particularly retirees, your health and many times can change gradually. Sometimes people live healthy right up until the very end. And then for others, health can change very suddenly, totally unexpectedly, and it can turn your whole entire situation upside down, for not only for the individual, but for that family. And that can be very difficult. So the question is, what's the plan? And that's what I call your post-health event plan. What would that situation look like? Who would be involved? Where would you be? What services would be available? What type of care would be available? We can't predict every single thing that might happen in our lives, but understanding the options, just as you all are doing right now, and thinking ahead, planning, and having those conversations is so important. And that can help alleviate stress later on. And that leads to the next one, which is family. The second biggest concern on that survey was not being a burden on my family. So clearly that's an important part of your plan. What involvement would you want from them? Certainly estate planning would fit into this category, and some other things. But all of these components are interconnected, and it's hard to separate one from the other. If we focus just on finances without thinking about these other ones, that's an incomplete plan. But here's the more important part. People often don't stop to think about where they live throughout their retirement years is actually a very important part of this. That sort of plays a role in every one of these components. Where you're living, not only now, but certainly if your health were to change, can impact, the involvement from family. It can impact your wellness at that point, or recovery, or whatever it may be, depending on your situation at that time. So many things. Housing plays a role in all of this. So when we recognize that, thinking more broadly about retirement planning and how housing fits into that, let's spend a moment talking about what those retirement living options are. As you all know, there's lots of options out there. And, some of the things that when I see or when I talk with people about it, I realize sometimes that one of the things people need to really understand when you're comparing your retirement living options or senior living options, whatever we want to call them, I think it's so important to understand the trade-offs. And that seems pretty obvious, but a lot of times I don't think that we fully account for the different trade-offs. And without that, it's very tough. And so what are those trade-offs? Well, number one, it's the cost today. When I say today, what I really mean is while you're living in that retirement community, but you're not in need of any type of care on a daily basis. So you're living mostly or fully independently. What's the cost to live there? Obviously, you have the monthly cost, and in many cases, maybe an entry fee. And that entry fee may be refundable down the road at some level. Perhaps the majority of it could be refundable. And you need to understand the requirements and the stipulations around that. But whatever the case may be, what's the cost today? Then, of course, what are the level of kind of what I call hospitality services and amenities? The reality is some communities simply provide more than others when it comes to these kind of things. And, frankly, some people want more than others when it comes to these kind of things. But I'm just talking about all the different types of things that are available from that community, all those different amenities, the things that, that we enjoy on a daily basis living there in that community and so forth. Clearly, there's a trade-off between these two, the cost and what's available, what you get for that cost. Seems obvious enough. But again, I've seen people try to compare options and they say, well, this one's more than this one. And you think, well, yeah, but you're getting all of this. And it could even include the size of the floor plan, the view, proximity, location, all these kind of things. But then we have to also think about the trade-offs later on. Number one, what types of care are available within that community if you should need care? Whether, again, that happens suddenly or whether it's gradually, what types of care are available? This is an important question because sometimes if there's certain levels of care are not available, a person may have to move again, maybe even again after that. So, some communities provide very little in the way of care. Other retirement communities maybe provide some, maybe assisted living or memory care, and then yet others, like Heritage at Brentwood, provide the full spectrum. Everything across the board, whether you're living fully independently or whether you need 24-hour care. So understanding what's available, not just today, but down the road is very important. But then also, what's the cost of that care? Whatever care is available, what's the cost of that care? So there's almost different subcategories within this last one. And so I want to take a moment and just go over with you very quickly the different pricing models offered by retirement communities. And I think this is really important to understand as you're comparing your options. And so the first two that I'm going to talk about are for entry fee communities. And then I'm going to talk with you about rental retirement communities, which don't require an entry fee, or at least, maybe a few $1,000s or something like that. So the first and most popular type of entry fee model is called life care. Now, this is what's offered by Heritage at Brentwood. And this is how it works. You can see on this chart, we have independent living, assisted living, / memory care, perhaps, and then nursing care. And you'll notice that these represent cost, and you'll see that it doesn't change, right? So what happens in a life care community, basically, no matter where you are within that community, whether you're living independently or need a high level of care, you continue paying the same thing. So for people who love predictability, for people who want to know what their maximum cost exposure is going to be on a month-to-month basis, no matter how much care they may need, life care can be a great solution. It gives you that predictability, and it can help that, it can prevent that sort of, depleting assets later on paying for care and all those kind of things. So it really allows you to plan ahead because you know what your cost is going to be. You know what the vast majority of your monthly cost is going to be, no matter whether you need care or not. Now, there are other entry fee communities that work like this. All things being equal. Now, that's a very important caveat to understand. But all other things equal, a community that operates under this model, you'll pay less while you're living independently. Maybe it's a lower entry fee, maybe it's a lower monthly fee, but in some form you'll pay less. But if you ever need higher levels of care, as you see here, you'll pay the full cost of that care at that time. And that can be really expensive. I mean, we can, $10,000, $12,000 a month if you really need those higher levels of care. And so that can eat up somebody's estate pretty quickly. Of course, as I said, you pay a little bit less, perhaps, while you're living independently. So you can see the trade-off there. So with this one, you have unlimited exposure to healthcare costs later on. But for some people, maybe that's okay. Maybe they're okay sort of rolling the dice on that or what have you. Now, there are some entry fee communities that are kind of a blend of these two. You don't see it as much, and I don't have time to get into too much of that, but you do see some that are sort of a hybrid. But then we also have rental communities, okay? So with rental communities, you don't have an entry fee, but the trade-off, and remember what I said, there's always trade-off. The trade-off is that all other things equal, as I already mentioned, you're going to pay more on a monthly basis, even when living independently, perhaps considerably more, because you have to. If there's no money coming in on the front end, then you have to pay that as you go. And so you're going to pay more on a month-to-month basis, all other things equal. Now, if that's not the case, then all other things are not equal. There's something, there's some trade-off there. But if one community was offering all three, then this is, how that would work. Now, when you need care, of course, you'll pay the full cost of that care at the time, just like with that previous option. So more while living independently, more if you need care. And if you look over here, you'll notice it says if available. Remember, some communities, particularly rental communities, don't always provide higher levels of care that you may or may not need. Who knows? But if you do, then you may have to move again. So understanding how these options work and these trade-offs, and recognizing that, if you were just planning based purely on the averages, all of these things would probably work out about the same, but we don't all live right in line with the averages. Some will need care longer. Some will need care for less time. Some of us will live longer than others. So, we have to sort of just educate ourselves, understand these options, and obviously be able to make an educated decision. So now what I want to do is spend the last few minutes talking a little bit about, coronavirus, the effects on senior living, retirement communities, and so forth. Now, I'm not a medical director or healthcare administrator, so I'm not going to talk about this at a really granular health or medical level, but I want to talk with you from kind of an outside perspective, because we do hear a lot from, prospective residents at retirement communities, from staff. Sorry, my son's in the background on video. Sorry about that. Prospective residents and residents of retirement communities and staff. And so we hear a lot of things, and I want to just share some of my sort of outside perspectives with you from conversations that I've had. Number one, when we talk about kind of how coronavirus has affected retirement communities, senior living, I think we have to separate care settings from independent living, because there's some differences there. So when we talk about care settings, what I'm really referring to is, let's say standalone nursing homes or skilled nursing care centers or assisted living. We know that the biggest impacts of coronavirus have been felt in nursing care environments, that highest level where we have the frailest population. And, a lot of these have been more, not every case, but many of them, particularly these big outbreaks we saw in New York early on, were these sort of standalone nursing care facilities, some of which weren't run very well to begin with, unfortunately. And that wasn't always the case, but many times. And it was perpetuated, I think, in some cases by lack of protocol and early response. As we know, some communities responded earlier than others, and that made a big difference. If there's one thing we know for sure, that those who acted early and decisively, that made a big difference. But, even besides that, we know that asymptomatic spread of this was, that's tough. That's a tough situation. A virus is, very little is known about it. And, with that spreads asymptomatically, that's a tough situation. That's a tough battle to fight. And so even those communities that did try to do the right things, did have the proper protocols in place, that made it very challenging, as you know, and certainly a lack of resources that many facilities are still struggling to obtain. Protective equipment, testing, all of those kind of things. But I will say there's a much better grasp now of the situation overall than there was several months ago, and that's good. I think prevention measures that are in place now are more effective. Obviously, people are, many communities, organizations have started to get a better feel of kind of what's worked and what hasn't, and even opening up some things in terms of visitations. Perhaps that's being done in different ways, but creative solutions around that and dining and those kind of things. But more than anything else, I'm an optimist. I happen to think that what the industry is learning right now is only going to help going forward. It's going to make a big difference. I'm already seeing technology solutions, early detection and prevention solutions that are coming out. Telehealth, I think technology is probably being accelerated by at least 5 years as a result of all of this. So that's good. Obviously, it's very unfortunate what we've seen happening with all of this, and that's tough. But and I don't want to lessen the severity of what's happened, but I do believe that that a lot of good is going to come out of this ultimately, based on what's being learned now. Now I want to spend just a moment talking about independent living, because as I said, this is a little bit different. Residents in independent living, of course, have a little more flexibility, quite a bit more flexibility, in terms of what I mean by that is just obviously they can still walk around the community, they can take walks, they can see their neighbors, they have to stay socially distant, but they're doing all kinds of creative things to maintain that sense of community. One of the things I've observed is that early on, certainly back in, say, February, March, when all this was first starting, residents were pretty fearful. That was my observation. Residents were pretty fearful. What's this going to mean to me, to my community? But very quickly, what I noticed was that gave way to gratitude, a sense of gratitude that, hey, I'm actually in a pretty good spot here. Yes, we're having to isolate just like everybody else, but at least I'm doing it with people or around people that I know, familiar faces, that we're all kind of in this together. That's been the mentality that I've seen or heard. And just this week, a new survey came out that was done over 3,000 independent living residents at communities in all different locations. And that was really, I thought, pretty powerful. It said 75% of those surveyed said they were really glad to be where they are right now. They were grateful that groceries are delivered to them, that all the right protocols are in place. Does that mean it's been easy? Certainly not. It hasn't been easy for any of us. Certainly hasn't been easy for me and my family, but they were thankful or glad. And 86% affirmed that they were glad they had made the decision to move, even despite everything that's gone on. So I thought those were pretty powerful statistics, and it represents what I have seen. Again, residents have told me that it doesn't mean there aren't some that aren't happy, but overall, I think most residents feel very good. And that sense of community is powerful. Even though the social distancing, that sense of community, as I mentioned earlier, is a very powerful thing. I think emotionally, psychologically, knowing that they're kind of in it together is a big deal for a lot of people. So this is a quote from an article in the Dallas Morning News that I found earlier this year. And I thought it reflects what I've been describing. They interviewed a resident of a community out there, and he said, the residents here feel far from trapped. We're grateful. If there's a good place to be at a time like this, it's here. And then he went on, he said, the people share the good times and the bad, so we'll make it through this. Again, this idea of gratitude, this is a good place to be, and that we'll get through this together as a community. That means a lot to people. So I'm not suggesting that everything's perfect. As I said, it's really not for any of us, but I do know we tend to hear the worst things in the media and on the news and that kind of thing. And so I think recognizing there's some pretty good stories out there and that people do actually feel pretty good overall about this, I think that's important for people to recognize, and I just always feel compelled to share that on these calls. So in summary, just a few things. Number one, remember, keep perspective, particularly we talk about the market and things going on. Without perspective, our emotions tend to get in the way. Have very clear objectives. Without clear objectives, we really cannot plan at all. So we're not talking, as I said, about goals and dreams, but just very straightforward, long-term, what are your plans financially? And recognize that it's not just financial. A retirement plan is much more than just finances. All those different components that I mentioned and how, housing fits into that. Housing is a very important part of every one of those components. And then finally, I just think, as I said, everything the industry's learning is only going to make it better going forward. There's a lot of good that's going to come out of this. So I think that's important for everybody to remember. And fortunately, as difficult as this situation's been, residents in the future, I think, will benefit from it. So with that, I want to thank you all again. I hope that you learned something that could be of value to you today. I really, really appreciate you joining this call. And I'm going to ask Judy to join me again. If you want to kind of unmute and come back on video, Judy. I don't know if we've gotten any questions or not. I would welcome you all to submit those now if you want. But Judy, maybe you've got some comments that you want to, follow up with at this moment.
Well, thank you, Brad. That was amazing, very informative. You really unpacked a lot of how people are feeling now, especially during coronavirus, and the thoughts of moving to a community, and that is it a good move now? Is it not a good move? What are people thinking that live in the communities now during coronavirus? I think that was a very good study to share with all of us. I know here personally, we have not, I have not worked from home. I have been here every day this year, not every day, but every work day this year. And none of the staff here at the Heritage has worked from home. So we have been here with the folks that live in the community and experiencing life with them, sharing with them their challenges during the intense time when they were, really just staying in their homes, and the evolution of coming out and being able to socialize again. The Heritage right now has started the activity programs. We have ladies' tea time. We have the Gentlemen's Guild. Folks are going into the library. Of course, they're socially distancing. Everybody's very respectful and wearing masks. It's been delightful to see the wave, how it went from, totally open to totally closed. And now it's coming back. It's coming back to life. It's just wonderful. We have put together a series of videos of current residents who have shared their thoughts during this time, and they are on our website. If you go to theheritagelcs.com, you will see some of those videos. Every director in the community who has been here on every work day this year also has shared a video and how they have handled this time during coronavirus. But it's been quite a journey, and I have to say that I'm not too far away from retirement, a few years off. This time has really sealed my thoughts into, oh my goodness, I really, my husband and I have to get a plan in place, even though we're not even 60 yet. We really have to think about this and really put a plan in place for ourselves, because we don't know, who every day it changes, and to have a plan in place is just gives you peace of mind and security. Are there any questions that have come up?
It looks like a couple did come in as you were speaking, Judy. So, and I'll touch on the first one, but I have a feeling you'll be better to talk more specifically. But it asked about the possibility of money available to your estate living at Heritage. So I think what this person is asking about is how that life care contract works that I mentioned earlier to you all, where your monthly cost really remains flat no matter whether you're living independently or needing health care and so forth. So Judy, I'll let you talk maybe more specifically about that at the Heritage.
Okay, I'm having just a challenge getting the questions open so that I can see them, but the Heritage as a life care type A community, provided you come in without any pre-existing conditions, and those that do have pre-existing conditions, let's talk a little bit offline on that. But the moment you move into the community, if you had an unfortunate event and you did need to transition over to long-term care, your monthly fee would stay the same. You would only pay an additional fee that covers the additional meals you receive during long-term care and the personal care items, which would be, soaps and incontinence products and things like that. So that amount right now today would be, on the high end, $740 for skilled nursing per month, or $720 if you're in assisted living. So instead of paying, say $13,000 a month if you needed nursing home care, you would be paying a monthly fee on the lowest end, $43.54 a month, plus $740 a month. So you're looking just about $5,000 a month, a little over $5,000 a month to get care that you would typically pay for, if you can even get it in a 5-star rated community, $12,000 to $14,000 a month. Oh, here I have the questions. So in terms of the entrance payment, so the entrance payment, that upfront fee you pay, that's based on the apartment or villa that you move into. There's different parameters that go into what that fee is. If you're in an apartment and you decide to move out, or you stay here until you pass on, when we resell that place, 90% of that amount you originally paid will go to your estate or the designated person you put on the document here at the Heritage. So you do have that return. We call it a return of capital of 90% for apartments. With villas, it's 80%. So you have an 80% return of that entrance fee if it is a villa, which would be a villa, duplex villa, or garden villa. One of the things I would like to mention regarding the entrance payments, I'm not sure if y'all received an email yet, but in the Redbud building, we have 3 apartments. We're discounting 10%. That would be the Franklin style of apartment, the Davidson style of apartment, and the Jackson style of apartment. So if you're familiar with those floor plans, and again, you can go on the website to pull those floor plans up in the Redbud building, we have actually a very limited time where we're discounting the entrance payments by 10%, which in one case with one of the Jacksons would be over $68,000 savings. So just had to get a little commercial in there. So in terms of the return of capital to your estate, apartments are 90% and villas are 80%. I see another question.
Oh, you got them. Okay, good. I was going to tell you, I could read them to you if you couldn't see them, but it looks like you've got them there.
So the other question, is the dining room open in independent living? So we have 2 restaurants in independent living. We have the Southern Oak Steakhouse and we have the Fireside Grill. We also have a marketplace which does sell groceries. All of them currently are not open. We are in the process of planning to open Fireside Grill in the not too distant future. We have to wait for certain metrics in Williamson County to be at a certain place for us to transition over to phase 3. We're currently in phase 2A. So we did do a survey with residents, and we had a very positive response that there are many residents who would come out and participate in public dining in the restaurants, but there are some that really want to keep the program in place, which we currently have, where breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if you order breakfast, lunch, and dinner, is delivered to your apartment or villa. We also have a grocery program where you can actually order groceries, and that gets delivered directly to your apartment or villa Monday through Friday. So we do that as well. And we will continue to do that even when Fireside Grill opens up for small, for socially distancing dining. So we're going to be running both of those programs simultaneously when we're able to even open up the Fireside Grill, the Fireside Grill for small groups or small dining or socially distanced dining. Okay, does the Heritage have any sister communities? That very good question. There is nothing like the Heritage anywhere else. I can assure you that, especially in the state of Tennessee. The Heritage has a managing partner called LCS, Life Care Services in Des Moines, Iowa. They have 140 communities throughout the country, but the Heritage stands alone. It has local owners, and LCS has a small percentage of ownership in the community, but they are the managing partner. LCS operates life care communities as well as a variety of different other communities. And they do operate a few other communities here in the Middle Tennessee area, but not a type A life care community. To learn more about LCS, you can go on the web at lcsnet.com. It has a very user-friendly platform where you can see other communities across the country that they do manage. They may not own them like they do part of the heritage, but they do have some other wonderful communities if you decide that you wanted to move outside of the state of Tennessee. Now, were there any more questions?
The only other thing I see, Judy, is there a waiting list?
Okay, so we have availability, and since we have availability, we do not have a wait list. And believe it or not, we do have one single family villa available, which is very unusual. So we do have a villa available. We do have, once the villa gets snapped up, we will resume our villa ready wait list. But we do have apartments available. We do have garden villas available, and we have one single family villa available. Any other questions?
Average age of, they're coming in now, average age of residents.
The average age of a resident that moves into the community is about 75 years old. The Heritage of Brentwood, the first resident moved in 2007. So there's a section of the community that has aged in place, and there are about 35% of the original residents who moved in 2007 who still live here in the community. So the average age of that section of the community, which is starting to get newer people to come in, is about 81 years old. Our oldest resident in independent living, I pointed him out to someone yesterday, is 99. We're hoping that we'll have some 100-year-old centennial folks that are in independent living. And the youngest resident we have right now in the community is 64.
Okay, well, there's one other, and then I think we probably, I know we've gone past our time here, or actually not too bad, okay. But maybe we want to try to get to one other one. This gentleman's asking, I don't know if you want to share pricing for villas and things like that, but he was kind of asking for something in terms of the pricing and so forth.
And if you email us, Stephen or I, we'll be happy to get you, an attachment with the pricing. So the villa that's available right now, the single family villa, it's about 2,000 square feet. I have to get I can't remember all the prices, so let me get my form out here. That villa is $811,000 for the entrance payment. It's an 80% return, and the monthly fee for one person in that particular villa is $5,983. And if you have a second person joining you, you add $1,640 a month. If you're looking at a one-bedroom apartment, we do have one bedroom apartment, and that is an entrance payment of $313,400, and the monthly fee for that one bedroom apartment is $4,327. And the monthly fee, of course, covers everything but your telephone, and most people have cell phones now.
All right, I think that's it, Judy.
Is that it? Oh my goodness. Well,
This
has been really great. You're probably seeing all my emails coming in because I'm sharing my screen. But I really appreciate your time, Brad. You're always a very good and very trustful source of information for us, and I appreciate your time today. I hope to do this again, maybe not this year, but probably in January. And again, if any of you that's still with us, and I think pretty much everybody is, mylifesite.net. Is that your website?
That's it.
Mylifesite.net. And then after you do that, go on theheritagelcs.com shoot us an email. My email is jgood@theheritagelcs.com or Stephen S. Williams @theheritagelcs.com. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Brad to, I guess, time to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you got something of value out of this, and wish you all a wonderful afternoon. So, goodbye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.